Shalom and welcome to The Genesis. My guest this week is Andrea Stolowitz, who is a playwright and a Portlander and a New Yorker, as we talk about. She and I begin by talking about the differences between New York and Portland as artistic scenes and how flourishing among other artists in a culture that supports art is such an important element in the development of one's craft. We talk about live theater. We talk about screen culture, economics. Then we begin to focus on Andrea's incredible work, and we talk about Berlin Diaries, which is a phenomenal play that she wrote, which probes inherited Holocaust trauma. We talk about storytelling ethics after October 7th and what that means for Jewish identity and how it affects each of us as Jews and as Jewish artists. Enjoy my conversation with this fabulous artist and playwright, Andrea Stolowitz. Andrea Stolowitz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. I'm talking to a Portlander who's actually in New York at this moment right now. The energy of New York agrees with you, or what?
Yeah, I'm from New York City originally, so I feel pretty at home here. I went to high school and college. I grew up in New York, and then I went to Barnard, which is, I feel pretty at home in the city. And then, of course, because I'm a playwright, this is where my industry is, so I come back and forth a lot. And so I'm just used to being on the ground here and being on the ground everywhere. But I do call Portland my primary residence, my home state, where I've spent most of my time and where I really think there's a lot of work to do. So I'm excited to do that. I'll be back in June. I would say the sheer volume of artistic activity in New York nurtures more in the area. And then there's a really significant more amount of funding for the arts in New York. And so that I think makes it very lively, very different than Portland. The arts funding in Portland is some of the lowest in the country. The individual artist grants are some of the lowest individual artist grants in the country.
Yeah.
Do I feel like more validated and seen when I walk around in a city where my art form is lauded, where people line up, even if I don't write a Broadway show, that people are lining up to have a live theatrical experience? Yeah. It really is a very vital and different thing because what I do is pretty similar, which is I create an event for people to arrive at in person and sit there and experience something with live performers. And to have that be a vital part of the city that you live in makes you as an artist, or I have to work to feel seen in other places that aren't New York, an artist and as a Jew.
It's a tough row to hoe, it seems, like live theater in our day and age. Everyone is, and I consider myself among the shamefully guilty, is so attached to screens these days. Have you found that cultural shift has informed your work or changed it or made it more difficult?
It certainly has made it more difficult for nonprofit theaters to get audiences, which then trickles down to making my work more difficult. I do think that it has impacted the industry as a whole, but I also think that what we do in theater is inefficient anyway. It's so expensive and inefficient, and it's like an artisanal bread or something, right? Mm-hmm. Where we've milled our own wheat and we have a mill in our backyard and everything is grown within 100 feet of our thing, and you're like, wow, this is going to be a $25 loaf of bread, but everything's going to be grown locally, milled in my yard and baked. And so I guess it depends what matters for the audience for that piece of bread. And then I guess if you just are I can just go to the supermarket and buy one for $2.50, you're like, that's cool.
Yeah. One of the things I've been tracing over the course of this podcast is that the touch points and the distinctions between artistic life and religious or spiritual life. And this is something else that I think that the religious world, the life of the spirit and the life of the arts has in common, which is that in a society that really values efficiency and monetization, there are hard things to have people tune into, or there are things that often don't feel valued in the way that they ought to feel valued.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the crux of it a little bit. But I also think that you could make a commercial piece of art I could say like, oh, I'm going to make not a $25 artisanal slice of bread, but I'm going to try to make something that is more affordable and like AKA the analogy being more commercial, right?
Yeah.
But then the question is like, is someone going to spend $7.50 for a slice anyway, or could I just go ahead and make the 20, right? You know?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the thing. And then you think like, why do I do this job? And then I'll say one other thing, which is I've had a couple students, I don't teach full time anymore, but I still mentor playwrights and work with young people. And some of them have talked about returning to theater because with AI, they can't tell anymore what's real. And so
that's so cool.
So like, the idea,
it's depressing, but it's a wonderful reminder of the power of that kind of work. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have something real in the theater that exists, and it's inefficient and expensive and will never be replicatable by AI because who would bother?
Right. I wanted to just jump into something that's a little personal that you've written about or spoken about, and I think it was for the Berlin Diaries. I heard the line that you wanted to explore whether your family's dysfunction was a result of the Holocaust or whether your family was just dysfunctional. And I thought that was both. It's a funny line, but it's also, there's a lot of pain behind that. What I'm interested there is the link between profoundly personal and intimate experience and the artistic process, which involves, sometimes research and exploration. And just tell me about how you can, first of all, what did you conclude? And second of all, what led you into that question?
Yeah. Gosh, it is, the reason that statement is funny is because it's so big. I think, there was always some part of me that was like, I was born in 1972. So I grew up in New York during the era of Marathon Man, when Nazis were still found on the Upper East Side. And this was my grandparents' lived experience. And I didn't know how unusual that was, because it wasn't unusual in New York, and it wasn't unusual in my milieu, and it wasn't unusual in my family. And certainly for my mom's generation, which is the children of Holocaust survivors, there's just this sense of like, we're alive, let's hop to it, everything's fine. And I think only when I really began to think like, well, why do I want to use my great-grandfather's diary, which my mother has always been trying to get me to read, which I've always refused to read, which is written to his grandchildren in 1939, who were soon to be born in the US. Why do I want to take this book that I've really hardly read and do a project in Berlin where I go around and I piece together all the things that he created and told this next generation about his life there. And they're all like, he wants to tell charming stories. This is 1939. It's for his grandchildren. He wants to tell about his office and his doctor being a doctor and where he liked to shop. And at the same time that he's writing this thing, he's also realizing that life is changing profoundly in Berlin and people are disappearing and he doesn't know where they are. And he's not really trying to write about that for the kids. He's not trying to hide it, but that wasn't the intent of the book. The intent was like, let me tell you about your background, that you're never going to learn German, probably. You're never going to do these things. And so like, here's
a snapshot of our beautiful and lovely life here.
Or even our complicated life, but it was certainly like even a complicated life the Holocaust is beyond comprehension. So it's like suddenly the things that would be the day-to-day complications of how in 1850 his Jewish family came to Berlin or whatever, it doesn't rank up. And so when I was doing that, I was like, why do I care? Why is this important to me? And then I was like, because I want to know what this did to my family. Like, I want to know who we were before this so I can understand what it might be like to not have this event be the defining factor. Like, who were we before the Holocaust? And I have children, so who are they going to be?
Was it that particular experiences of dysfunction and hard family stuff made you wonder, where does this come from? Or was it simply kind of like, well, the Holocaust was a big deal, I wonder what it was like before the Holocaust.
I mean, it's because of all the typical Holocaust things of like depression, or my grandfather's a manic depressive. The story goes that like upon finding out that what happened to his brother who was deported to Auschwitz, after sending a private investigator to Amsterdam in 1945 to try to figure out what happened to his brother and his brother's family, he finally got like a telegram with the information that he had been denounced by his secretary and had been deported to killed. And like this story goes, and then he took a nap and woke up and was a manic depressive. No, that's not how that disease in fact works, but that's how the story is in my family. Like my mom has stories of people coming, she's born in 1942, and so people coming in 1946, 47, 48, relatives, and it's like where the wild things are. It's like exactly what Maurice Sendak wrote about, is like these people coming with no teeth, and like stories of like, oh, that person used to have really beautiful black hair, but it went white all of a sudden when like so-and-so was taken away. And I think like, then you think, what does this do to you as a person if you're constantly like, oh my gosh, I have to be careful. Am I going to be thrown out of somewhere? Like, you know, if you're brought up with this feeling of unsafety, what happens to you? And so I guess that's the general, but then there's like manic depressive. There's like, why do people not talk to each other? Like, how is it that we can have such a small family? Yeah. Like such a small family because so many people were just killed or are just somewhere because of the diaspora, because of the Holocaust, just somewhere else, and we don't have any connection with them or know where they are. How is it that the people that are in the same place can't get along with each other? Or like, how can like after the Holocaust, how can we like not get together in New Jersey? Like, right? Like what's like, of course people are people. And so that's the thing, is like every family has a dysfunction. Everyone has the cousin they don't like or whatever. You're like, I don't want to hang out with that guy. And that's totally normal in a normal family. But is it totally normal when like you don't have really that much family? Because you'd think, could we just like maybe try to...
On the personal level, did you get, I don't know if answers is the right phrase, but did you get what you were looking for?
Yeah, so the play not only interrogates the past, it interrogates the present. So it's a very much autofiction, which means that everything's through the character of Andrea Stolowitz's perspective. Andrea Stolowitz is played by two performers who share me and share all of the other characters. And I think so because I interview my current living family in the play. And as I'm in Berlin, like as I'm going to Berlin, so we see like the little dysfunction even around like, oh, you're going to Berlin, have fun, like tell us what you found out. And then like midway through, I'm like, hey, I'm finding this stuff out. Did you guys know that? And they're like, that can't be true. How is it that we couldn't have known that? And these are my living family in like 2016.
How did they feel about you doing this? Was it welcome?
Well,
or did it
initially,
feel intrusive?
my mother thought it was great because she was like, finally, you're doing something with the diary I told you to do.
Yeah.
And everyone else was like, huh. They had their own, like one of my cousins was like, okay, have fun. And like I kept saying, and it's in the play, I kept saying to her like, hey, how about we meet before I go to Berlin? I'd love to talk to you. I'd like to talk to you about how our great grandparents were cousins. And like, I'd love to hear your stories. And I'd love to hear about your mother. Her mother was, her grandmother was in, and her mother was basically in hiding in Munich. And so she was sort of like, okay, great. Let's definitely do that before you leave. And she lives in Oregon, actually, coincidentally. Yeah. And we could never do it. And in the play also, it's like, I finally go to the coast and we're all leaving. My whole family's going and we're at the coast where she's there with her family, and we're like half a mile away, and she gets to this big fight with her husband, and we never meet at the coast.
So it's just
like
it's too
haystack rock. It's just that, who knows? Maybe we're just bad organizers. That's exactly the question. It's like, well, is it the Holocaust or are we just bad at organizing?
I'm sorry.
Is it
I'm laughing. It's funny and it's not fun. Is it the Holocaust?
But it's true.
That's such a Jewish comment, right? Because it gets to the mundane.
You're like, oh, you got into a fight with your husband. We're at the beach. I know I wanted to talk to you about this Holocaust thing. I went to Berlin for a year, but like, you know, you were at the pizza place and then you got in a fight, and we're at the coast and my kids are hungry. And so I guess we drove all the way out here, but we're just not going to meet, even though like in the play, there's this line, and the line says, it feels as if the ocean is between us and not across from us. And it's really, do normal families like just rather than like if they're literally half a mile from each other, but they can't manage to meet? And if so, don't we have an obligation if there's such a small family after the event of the Holocaust? But maybe not. Maybe we're just all people. We go on and we can be dysfunctional.
Well, one of the reasons that the Berlin Diaries is so powerful is, and just so rich is, you know, Jews aren't alone in this, but I would say most Americans at least aren't aware of the ways in which history profoundly shapes their experience, their family experience, their inner psychological experience. I mean, I believe that history shapes everyone's reality, but not every ethnic or cultural group is touched by it in a way that they can trace back with effort. And so the play really brings that into relief. And what you're talking about, I think, really illustrates the extent to who I am is so determined in so many ways by things that may have preceded me by generations.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And you're right. Like everybody has some degree of that for sure. And so what is it that makes up the me now? And what is it that I pass on to my children? And I think in particular with the legacy of the Holocaust, what do I want to pass on? And I think for me, so the play, I didn't expect the play to work through these things, which is so funny. I think the best projects are ones where you're just like, this is great. I'll do this project and I'll figure out these things. But they were hard. I would say that that question for my living family of, hey guys, there might be something a little, like we might be traumatized a little. What do you guys think? Was not really like welcome because nobody, once you open the door to that, then there's something wrong with you. That's like that no one wants to be told that there's something wrong. Everyone would rather be garden variety dysfunctional. Like lots of families don't get along. Lots of families are small. Lots of families can't show up at the shore or like answer calls. Or that's the other thing in the play is like none of us can ever talk on the phone. We're like, what? Hello? Where are you? Yeah. And it's just like this. So I guess through the play, what I did find out, which isn't shocking, I always tell directors, the shocking thing about the play is that the character of Andrea Stolowitz, is not that the character of Andrea Stolowitz finds that she had 18 first cousins that were deported and killed in the Holocaust. That is not surprising that a Jew goes to Berlin in search of lost family and finds, oh my God, they were deported and killed, right? Yeah. So that's not surprising. What's surprising is that the guy who wrote the diary, who's writing it for his grandchildren, who is in the known living experience of my still living family, somehow didn't convey this information. So that information was a surprise. Right. And I think that it's not like he hid it. He died in 1948. Maybe his daughter who was in New York already knew, but somehow this knowledge did not get transferred to just the next generation. Yeah. And I think wow, why? Why? And then I think you begin to see when things are missing from the history, like things are not said, that's where things you think, what does it mean to be dysfunctional? What does it mean? Is it just the Holocaust, terrible thing happened? And no, it's not just that. It's also then how people relate and respond to it.
That's so interesting because sometimes the things manifest in very clear and obvious ways, but then also there's the silences and the ellipses, which is a different kind of effect and harder to discern because obviously you don't know it's there.
Yeah, I look all the time. It's like we started talking before this interview. You're like, so where do you live? Do you live in Portland? Do you live in New York? Do you live? And I'm like, oh, I live in Portland. I also have this place in New York. I also have German citizenship. I also live in Berlin sometimes. And it's okay. This is an obsession. I have 2 passports. I try to make a home in many different cities. That is to me a sort of direct result of there's always a place to hang your hat. That's just a reaction to things that I wouldn't have thought about. And what makes that different than somebody else who just likes to travel? I don't know. Yeah. Maybe that's the same, but mine feels different. How do I know? I'm just me and not them.
In the Berlin Diaries, and if people haven't seen it, it's maybe you can explain it better than I, but there is Andrea Stolowitz and then there's Andrea Stolowitz. So can you just explain this device first of all, and then I want to ask you about it.
Yeah. So I just don't love one-person shows is how it started. I like the interaction between the actor and the audience and the actor and another actor. And so I knew I didn't want to have just in the form of this play. There were a couple things that I knew. One of them is I knew how is this play going to be different than a staged version of The Diary of Anne Frank, right? I was just when someone walks into the theater, how are they going to know it's different? And I'm the form has to be so different that they're I've never seen something like this before. The story feels, how am I going to ask people to look at a story that they think they know? A story about the Holocaust, but it's not me, but it looks that way. and it'd say like, sorry, you don't know this story. And it had to be in the form. And then I knew that I was a character in it. And I knew that I didn't want the form to just be me talking to the audience and then like little scenes that I introduce happening, because I just find that boring personally. So I was like, okay, so I guess there's two actors and they're both me. And I was like, okay, if they're both me, is like one an Andrea Prime? Is there, how am I talking to myself?
Andrea Prime, yeah.
And then I realized that like we all have an internal narrative, right? And it was fun to externalize the interior narrative. And I'm also unkind to myself as an artist. Like, it's like I think we're all unkind to ourselves internally, but it became like clear and funny that I was like, Andrea would be like, I'm off to Berlin to write a play. And the other Andrea would be like, you barely got funding for it. And let's keep that part, like not talking about it. But then there was times where the two Andreas were collaborative with each other of now we have to go find out like where this person's buried. Let's go, you know? And it's,
I was reading the Elegy, and which is another great play kind of set in the context of COVID. And I don't know why, but it kind of leapt out at me, and maybe then this shaped what I was thinking about in when I thought back to the Berlin Diaries, and that is that you have an astronaut at the International Space Station, and this person says, it was very odd looking down on the Earth, knowing that it wasn't changing physically in any way, but knowing that the people that we loved were going through something very difficult. I was wondering, is this what a playwright does, or is this what Andrea does? Like you're always one step removed from your own immediate experience, from the actual experience. And there's something that feels very, very Jewish about that. It made me wonder, on the one hand, you have these profoundly intimate experiences that you're writing about, like, you know, stuff only you could know, what your family is like. And on the other hand, you're stepping back out of it and getting a perspective from afar. And I just wanted to know what's behind that, and if you've thought about that.
yeah, that's so interesting. I want to circle back to like why you think that's a particularly Jewish trait in a second, because I'm curious about that. But I think, yes, playwrights inhabit, like any author or actor, inhabit others' experiences, and we try to really put ourselves in that mindset of that person to try to really take on what they are feeling so that we can understand it. And because the only way I think humans can really understand something is to by associate it with something that we also have experienced. Just right, how else do we know? And so ultimately, like we have to create understanding, and so it's always through somebody else's experience that we're translating back to something that we can understand, even if we have to break it apart into tiny fractals to be like, okay, I understand this, and then this, and I understand that. But the only way they understand those things is because somehow we've connected something that we understand about the human condition, either because it's happened to us or to people close to us or to things we've seen,
so
right?
Even when looking at your own experience, you're saying?
I think yourself as character is really interesting, right? And so I think with the Berlin Diaries in particular, that play is a play where these two Andreas are separate until the very end of the play, where they sing a line of a song together. It's the only overlapping text. And that song is being sung to Andrea's child that we hear in the beginning. And so the play really is, I think, structurally a reunification of the Andreas. Like, there's no perfect happy ending. So it's not like the Andreas are one now, they're always fused. No, there's still the self-deprecating one. And, you know, but the reason that they're fused, this kind of bifurcation of character, is put to rest because actually I did discover that something happened that we didn't know about. And for whatever reason, I could be like, oh, and the solution to this, the way to not pass on this trauma, and there is trauma, is to not hold these secrets, is to try to like find these things. And I think when Andrea, the character, is able to finish this journey in Berlin, find these things, it isn't just finding out what happened, but then as she goes and contacts all of these relatives through the restitution files. And so she's done this huge task. And then it's like, I have gone back to the past. I have found out what was left unsaid. I have told whoever I can about it. I've scanned all the documents on my iPhone. And now I have to call this good. I know what I need to know. And what I need to know is, yes, way we all behave is a direct reflection and response to this event in our family that was also the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like that we can be both normal family dysfunction, but also recognize that we have a response to things that we can't always explain. And that's related to this trauma. And I never would have known that before the Berlin Diaries at all. I even suspected that. And I never would have, I would have been in the dark about that. I'd be like, sure, I'm sure like some things passed on, but what do you really know? But like,
so the play really like documents your own transformation is maybe too big of a word, but your own integration of this experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think all plays documented transformation of a main character, right? And that's kind of what catharsis is. Like a character goes on a journey. They have a big defining event of sort of a giant like climax. And then the audience experiences catharsis. And then we have this denouement and we're at the end and the audience is like, we've discovered it with you. And that doesn't always have to happen, but essentially that is the structure of some kind of drama, which is a character goes on a journey. Okay. Something happens. They come to the final reckoning, like you are my father. And then we move on. And there's other kinds of drama. There's other non-Western drama, but that's like a story that we...
Sure. Ours is not just a tradition. You know, we always say tradition, like that's what Judaism is. But it's not just a tradition like we do what our ancestors did. It's a self-critical tradition. Like the foundations of Judaism are looking back on the previous generations and trying to understand what and how we integrate what they're doing today in this discussion and the mission and the Gemara. And so already within our textual tradition, I think there's like a step of once removed. But then I think for sociocultural reasons, like I think there's a reason that so many comedians have been Jewish and so many people in the arts have been Jewish. And that's because they're less so, I think, in our generation and probably less so for our children's generation. But this sense of, you know, I'm a little bit different from other people. And so, you know, you stand in the back of the class and you make jokes instead of kind of being in the flow. You're joking about the football team. You're not on the football team. So, and, you know, journalists, playwrights, et cetera, that's why I do think there's something about any number of ethnic communities, but it's certainly, you know, most prominently in the 20th century in America, at least, or in the West, are Jews.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. So I do think that like in my work in the Berlin Diaries, it's very personal, but I will say that there's also something else that like came up for me. This notion of like how we tell stories and where our fictive imagination is free to roam, particularly in terms of identity at that in 2018, 2019, what is that juncture? What are the characters that there's big questions of whose stories have been taken from them, like appropriating other people's stories. Like what are the obligations that I have when wanting to tell a story that's outside of my own lived experience? And I think where I fall on this is where I think a lot of artists fall, which is that we can access many experiences and artistically, and we should put them, like they always come through our lens anyways. But I think that the cultural moment of that being really acceptable for theaters is not a disconnect.
Can you say more about what is this cultural moment?
I think like a white Jewish author writing a character that is not in the minority or majority culture of white or the culture of Jewish, but in another identity box could be problematic
now.
But I don't think necessarily for artistic reasons. I think for cultural reasons.
Do you think is that a loss?
I guess like it depends on if you look at all this as like a zero-sum game. So there should be more art by more people telling more stories. And then there's there's room for many stories and many people telling them. When that becomes not the case. So I think we as artists like to think that we don't exist in a zero-sum game. We exist in radical hospitality. And I think that's true from the artistic lens. I think then it gets to be a zero-sum game because there's only 4 plays that will be produced a season, right? And so like, how do we live in a world where, no, it's not a problem. There should be so many stories from so many people with so many perspectives that we all learn from them and experience them and have a greater storytelling togetherness experience. But when it feels like people are being excluded from something,
or exploited, then
no, it's not an artistic question. It becomes like a social question. And so I think I've written a play called Recent Unsettling Events, which is, it's about a real life event at a college, and it has many characters, many different identities. And I wrote it in 2019, and it won a bunch of awards in 2020, and it just won another award. And that play has never been produced, but it's had readings, and it's won awards, and it's won prizes. And I don't think anyone will ever produce it because there's not one character in it who's like the white Jewish woman. I very intentionally created characters that were all not me. There isn't one.
And so why would that lead to it not being produced?
Because I'm a white woman. And I think that like the perception of the identity of the author and the identity of the characters feels frightening to
feels risky.
It feels risky.
Yeah.
And also the play though is about this. It's exactly about like freedom of speech and like how we can, I mean, it's about a campus environment, which now is so strange. There's like a new worry, which is like Trump and his cronies clamping down on free speech. But there's also, and there has been, and we can't say that there's not, a sense of censorship on the left too. Sure. And so my play is directing this sense of censorship to those on the left, the liberals. Yeah. The bigger danger right now might be Trump taking funding away from universities and using threats of anti-Semitism for his own agenda. But there's still, we can still, I'm more interested in club that I belong to, which is the left. I mean, critique my fellow lefties and say, wait a minute, did you think about it like this? Did you think about it like this? Yeah. And I guess what I was surprised about is that not everybody who's progressive wants to look at those complicated things.
Well, I agree with you 1,000%. And I think the left has to tend to the left. I mean, we're not going to persuade people who are willingly and explicitly using dollars and force and threats to silence speech. We're not going to persuade them, but hopefully people who are engaged in the question of humanities on the left are persuadable. Right. And I think we do have to attend to that. That reminds me of something that I think I read, that the Cork Diaries, which is another wonderful piece of yours.
It's called Numbered BR Days.
Numbered BR Days. I think that I read that came out just before October 7th. Is that right?
I was asked to do it before October 7th, and I got funding for it from the Irish Arts Council 2 weeks before October 7th. And so I had already started doing some of the interviews, and then I really completed the bulk of the project post October 7th in Ireland. And that is also fraught. I feel like some kind of crazy Larry David character walking into every room that I shouldn't be in, and I really, that is the hardest one, because it's about the Jewish community that I ought to have the authority to write about. If you look at all the things of, I'm a Jew, I'm an outsider in Cork, I'm a playwright, and yet it becomes the hardest one. And I also know I'm a character in this one too, because I thought I could, by using verbatim work, which is real words by real people to tell a story, I thought, okay, I'm going to get out of this thing, which is I'm not allowed to inhabit another perspective because that might be culturally insensitive in this moment, and I don't want to take away someone else's story. So I'm going to use their words. But the problem is I'm not using their words to the way they want to be seen, because I am not interested in that, because I am the creator of the universe. And
you can't escape yourself.
Exactly. And I don't make art just to reflect what a community wants to spend. So with this project, and I'm still in the process of it, I'll have a workshop in New York. I got yelled at by the head of the Jewish community in Cork in the lobby after the showing of that play in June. And I'm still haunted. I'm still thinking what is a work in progress? Why couldn't we come into conversation? What is feeling so raw? What did I step into that just was so upsetting? Now, of course, I've thought a lot about it. I've talked to my team, but I think ultimately, I really thought I could just flit into this story and use other people's words. But what I realized is I have to, if I'm creating a piece of art around being Jewish right now, I have to have an opinion about that. Not just opinion, but I believe something and I need to say it, and that was never my intent. And
do you really, you don't really believe what you're saying. You're saying that's what other people would say to you.
Well, I do believe what I'm saying.
Oh, you do? Okay, yeah. So
I do.
okay,
I do.
okay.
Like, I think some of it is like, did you see the movie Sabbath Queen? It's the Lab Shul. It's Amichai. It's a.
Oh yeah,
he's
Amichai Levy. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a great movie. But anyway, it's this guy, Sandy Dabrowski's recording it for 20 years. And of course, like we arrive at the end of this journey and we're in October 7th and it turns into this like moment where it's, we can't make a movie that ends in the now without saying something about the now.
Okay, so that's so fascinating, gives you a perspective on Jewish life that you wouldn't otherwise have. And it sounds like, whatever the answer is to that question, this experience really made you feel like this is not the time just to be the outside observer.
I'm wrestling with it. Like, I don't know. I was like, oh, I don't want to be another person. I don't want to be another character in another one of my projects. I've just done that. I didn't even really want to write about another Jewish project, but I was asked to do it. They were like, hey, do you want to write a project about Jews? And I was like, I just did a project about Jews. How many projects? And again, the jokes, how many projects about Jews do I really have in me? And the answer is like, what I've always just seen myself as a playwright and a New Yorker and a Jew, like in that order, right? And I think the order has now reversed itself. And now I'm a Jew first, and I have not ever embraced that identity over the others because I didn't grow up religious. I'm a very secular Jew. That wouldn't be my first identity choice. I would identify with being influenced by Holocaust survivors and growing up in New York and being in a Jewish environment, but I wouldn't have picked my identity.
I've spoken with so many people for whom that question is so alive, whether they're artists or not. What we're not naming, but is kind of obviously in the background, is October 7th and the world's response to it and rising anti-Semitism and all the stuff that's happening. And I think that trying to maybe hold your Jewishness at an art, not even trying, but just having not Judaism be the center of who you are, and then being forced by historical circumstance in the present moment to kind of grapple with that and asking what your responsibility is something that is widely shared by so many people. And I think as an artist, I imagine it's profoundly challenging because that's not,
Well,
it's
now
not the only thing you're interested in.
But now I would, because now yes, if it were, yes. And it's been like this for some time. I can draw a correlation. Some of it is like own self-discovery, right? Like nobody forced me to write the Berlin Diaries. Obviously, I wanted to write it. So I went into a very Jewish story quite intentionally because I was going to be in Berlin. I'm married to a German. That's a whole other like level of psychoanalysis. It's like, so there's all of that. But I do think then with this project, I could have just said, it came from a reach out from the Abbey Theatre, which is the National Theatre of Ireland. And I could have just said, no, I'm sorry. I just did a Jewish project. But I was like, well, if it's like I actually called an Irish friend of mine and she was like, it's the National Theatre of Ireland, so why don't you just say yes? And I was like, of course. Like, who says no? I'm sorry, I'm done writing about Jews for the day. Yeah. No, you're like, of course. And then you're like, I was like, okay, I'll interview this community in Cork where I live. It's very interesting. And the biggest interesting thing about it was like, there's this kind of schism among the Jews that lived there. So there's no a liberal Jewish tradition in Irish Jewry. It's Lithuanian Orthodox. And so this tradition in Cork started in 1880, and this group of, at the top of their mount was only ever 400 people, had this synagogue. It's an 111-year-old synagogue, and it's right in the downtown center of Cork. And there's only one resident rabbi in all of Ireland. It's the chief rabbi. He's Orthodox. This is a much longer story. But so they have this synagogue, and the last trustee of the Cork Hebrew congregation, which is this group, didn't and couldn't really see eye to eye with the incoming influx since the late 70s of more progressive Jews from England. It came from all over. And as Celtic Tigers started forward, Jews came from Argentina, art engineers, Jews were there. And some of them were just more progressive. And this was like a moment frozen in time for Cork Hebrew congregation. Was like Lithuanian Judaism from 1880. It was like the women were upstairs in the gallery, right? And so in 2016, the last remaining trustee of the Cork Hebrew congregation sold the 111-year-old synagogue to the Seventh-day Adventists rather than making it available to the new Jews. And I had to meditate about this for a very long time to understand, which probably you know already because you're a scholar of Judaism. But I was like, why? And after 6 months of thinking about it, 6 months, I came up with what was obvious all along, is that he just didn't regard these people as properly Jewish.
Yeah.
It's like the most
So
obvious thing. And then he was like, I cannot pass this on to people who are not Jewish. And that was like a real thing. So I was like,
So
well,
heartbreaking. So heartbreaking.
so that was what drew me to the story initially.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this is a story about how these people persevered, and there's still a Jewish community in Cork, and they've been embraced by Ireland. And I got all these stories, and I was like, oh my God, it's like Ted Lasso season 3. It's okay, how to be in a community, right? And then October 7th happened, and the same people that I had interviewed were now like, oh, I'm frightened to wear my Star of David to the hospital. And then like it became a thing where like you couldn't critique Israel. It would be anti-Semitic to critique the Israeli government, which
They're
of course
having a
is not.
uniquely Jewish experience. Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I'll write about that, because how can I not? And then of course, I can't just come in and waltz in and write about some Irish people and some Jewish people and put these people all together, because in the end, I have to fucking say what I think.
I understand.
Oh, I'm not allowed to say that on the
No,
podcast.
you're allowed to say that. It's okay.
I have to, like, I can't just be like, this person says this and this person says this. In the end of the day, the buck stops with me, and I don't know where that is.
The question of what does it mean for me to be a Jew at this moment is first and foremost. What am I called upon to do? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end. I really, really appreciate your time. I so appreciate your beautiful work. And I hope next time you're out here, it would be nice to sit down for that cup of coffee. Be well.